VTSAX. Great diversification, incredibly low fees, amazing returns. How's it able to do all this? What's the magic that fuels the engine? Let's find out. So my last video, I covered investing for beginners, which basically I just advocated for putting the bulk of your fees in something like VTSAX and playing around with maybe 5 to 10% of it. So if you have $100,000, let's say, 90,000 of it goes into VTSAX, and that 10,000 you can use to play with cryptocurrency. You can pick stocks like Tesla or whatever you want. Play around with it, try and have fun, but expect to lose it all just in case. Now, I went into some detail about why I think VTSAX is just so good, but if you don't watch that video before, I'll just recap it real quick, and here it goes. There are 3 big reasons why I think VTSAX is just pretty much the best index fund you can choose. And the first is that you're automatically diversified across 3,600 companies as soon as you buy in. Now, in broad terms, diversification is simply a term for basically trying to minimize as much risk as you can. So if you invest your money across a huge number of companies, then if one of those companies does bad, it doesn't really affect you because chances are most of them are probably doing pretty good. And that's really why index funds are one of the best things you can invest in, is because your risk is really comparatively low compared to something like dumping all your money into Tesla or Coinbase. So one of the main downsides to a traditional index fund that tracks, like, for example, the S&P 500, is that they track the top 500 biggest companies in America. But just because a company is big doesn't mean it's necessarily doing well. And an example of this would be Macy's. Now, if you've been in a Macy's store before, you know that they're typically in malls. You walk in, you buy clothes, and you walk out like a typical store. The problem is that in-person sales are down, and they have been for quite some time. If you look at things like Amazon or even Walmart.com, online sales are on the rise and in-person sales are on the decline. And this means Macy's performance has been down for quite some time now. But because of their sheer size, they're kept inside the S&P 500, meaning that your money is invested in a company that's not doing that well. Now, one of the reasons why VTSAX is better in this regard is because it holds a lot of stock in companies that are considered small or medium cap. It means the companies are very small, but they have a chance to grow. So think about Amazon when it first went public, right? It's had a phenomenal growth rate, but it was very small when it first came out. So as a result, any money you have invested in that would have skyrocketed. So VTSAX handles the offset of that bad performance of companies like Macy's by simply having money put into companies that are really small but have a huge chance to grow. And so that's why there's 3,600 companies as opposed to 500. So the second big reason to invest in VTSAX is that you don't have to be an expert in any of the companies you're investing in. Typically, if you want to do well with investments, you have to research a company, you have to learn about its leadership, its CEO, who's managing it, the board, all this stuff. You have to look at the projected sales growth. It takes a lot of work, and you still may not be right. However, with the VTSAX, all this is determined by the market for you, and we'll be going over that shortly, but essentially, by not having to do any of the manual work, it allows you to have incredibly low fees, and that's really the third big reason. In an industry with average fees of around 1%, VTSAX charges 0.04%. So basically, for every $10,000 you have invested, you only need to pay them $4. That's crazy, and that's low. And ultimately, again, that means more money in your pocket at the end of the day. So we have great diversification. We have low fees. We have all this offer without any real research needed on your part. How's it able to be this good and this cheap? That's what this video is really all about. And it all starts with the market. So with a typical fund, you normally have a person or a team of people who are constantly researching companies, trying to figure out which one's going to do well, which one's not going to do well, trying to move your money into ones they hope will do well. And then if they're right, you make money. But then you have to pay them for it because that's a lot of work. However, VTSAX manages to do the same thing without hiring pretty much anybody. And the way they're doing this is they're choosing companies based on their market performance. So they're essentially letting the market choose which companies go up, which ones go down, and all the hard work's done for them. Now, as an example of what I'm talking about, let's use a couple of pins. Now, let's say that company A writes this pin and company B makes this pin. Now, each of these pins have their pros and cons, right? One writes better, one looks cooler, maybe one, I don't know, feels better in the hand, whatever the case is. But over time, one of these pins is going to be better overall than the other one. And that means that it's going to have more sales. And in turn, that company's going to get bigger. So as that company gets bigger, guess what? It ends up in VTSAX. So if you're invested in VTSAX, you're automatically going to be invested in the company that makes the best pins, right? No work required on your part. You didn't have to look at how a pin is made or which ones have the better sales numbers, any of that. The market shows it for you. Essentially, the company that made the better pin made the more sales and got bigger. It automatically fell into VTSAX. Whereas the pin that made, or the company that made bad pins, they fell out because in the end, their pin wasn't as good. Now, typically, like I said earlier, you have a team of people researching companies trying to figure out which one's going to make the better pen. And they put the money in there and they hope that they're right. But with this, we just let the market do the work for us, essentially. Now, in his book, J.L. Collins calls this the self-cleansing feature of VTSAX. And it's really one of the best examples of what makes VTSAX as special as it is, because all the work of choosing the best companies in America, that's done for you. You don't have to do anything. And again, this is how they're also able to get very low fees, because since it's all automatic, nobody has to be paid for this. It's really some great news. And I use these pens as an example, but in reality, VTSAX has companies from literally all over the economy. Real estate, huge tech companies, pen companies, whatever the case is. It's the best from each sector that fall into VTSAX, and the bad ones fall out for you. So we've gone over the benefits of why VTSAX is so good. We've gone over how it works and what makes it so good, and why it's better than, I think, things that track like the S&P 500, for example. Lastly, you might be wondering how to actually buy into this. And you've got two ways to buy into VTSAX. The first is just to go on the Vanguard's website, put money into your market account, and then buy the fund, VTSAX. However, the downside to this is that you need at least $3,000 to get started. So if you don't have $3,000, the other option is you can buy the VTI index or ETF. And VTI is simply the ETF version of VTSAX. Now, VTI can be bought on pretty much any platform that you typically use to buy and sell stocks. Now, for all intents and purposes, buying VTI and buying VTSAX are just two ways of doing the same thing. However, there is one difference that sticks out to me. It's why I actually choose VTSAX over VTI. And that is that with the VTSAX, you can set up recurring deposits. So you can make your investing essentially go on autopilot. So if you want to put, $300-400 a month, you can set it up to where it's automatically withdrawn from your account every month and you don't have to worry about it. Whereas with VTI, you've got to manually make those purchases every time. But other than that, it's not a big deal. There's not that much of a difference. So that's it for the video. That's the end. My name's Cody Aaron. I want you to buy VTSAX and subscribe. And that's it. I'll see you next time.